Every night, Emily would sit by the window of her apartment, staring into the darkened street below. The same routine, the same quiet solitude. Her neighbors were distant figures, people she barely knew but never thought much about. The streetlights hummed, the occasional car passed, and the wind would rustle the leaves of the trees. It was peaceful, or it had been until the night she noticed him. It started small, barely noticeable, a fleeting shadow in the reflection of the glass. The first time she saw it, she assumed it was just her mind playing tricks. But each night, it grew harder to ignore. Every time she turned her gaze toward the street, there he was, a figure standing across the street, staring up at her apartment. At first, Emily thought it was just some random person who happened to be in the area. But the longer she watched, the more unsettling it became. He never moved, just stood there, facing her window, his face hidden in shadow. The first few nights, she tried to shake off the feeling. Maybe he was just waiting for a cab or lost in thought. But the unease settled in her chest, heavy and suffocating. She couldn't focus on anything else, the creeping sensation that she was being watched. It got worse the night she decided to confront him. She waited until midnight, her heart pounding in her chest, before she pulled the curtain back slightly and peered through the glass. He was still there, standing perfectly still, his eyes locked on her apartment. For a moment, she froze, unsure of what to do. Then, her hand reached instinctively for the door to her apartment. She needed to get some air, needed to escape the suffocating silence. But when she opened the door, the figure was already standing at the end of the hallway, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her blood run cold. No footsteps, no sound. He had moved so silently, she hadn't even heard him approach. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice shaking. The man didn't answer. He simply tilted his head, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if studying her. Emily took a step back, the hallway now feeling impossibly small. And then, without warning, he spoke, his voice low and almost too soft to hear. "I know what you've been doing." Her breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" He smiled, a slow, chilling smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I know why you're watching. The question is, why are you still looking?" Emily stumbled backward, her pulse racing. She slammed the door shut, locking it behind her, her body trembling. Her mind screamed for her to run, but her feet felt like lead. Her mind was too consumed by the thought. How had he known? That night, she couldn't sleep, couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in on her. When the sun finally rose, she thought maybe it was just a nightmare. Maybe the man was a figment of her imagination. But when she went to the window and looked out, there he was, standing across the street, eyes locked on her apartment. Only now he was grinning,